Well, good afternoon. I'm a resource manager at Ivanhoe, so I work on the geological modeling, grade estimation. I'm going to be talking initially about the copper market, our views on the copper market before going into our copper project. So Ivanhoe has a major PGE copper nickel deposit in South Africa. It also has a very significant, very high-grade zinc deposit in the DRC. But Kamoa-Kakula is our copper deposit, and that's going to be the focus. Okay. Sorry, this is not working. All right, so while we wait for the slides to come up, I think the challenge that we're facing in the world today in terms of what's going to be driving the copper market, from our view, is something that's quite familiar to big cities. It's something that a city like London, for instance, has known for hundreds of years through different stages. So through coal burning in the previous ages, a lot of pollution was created. That pollution is a function of an urbanized society, and society is becoming more and more urbanized. We've seen dramatic urbanization in China, for example, a city like Shanghai. I'll show you an image just now, where it's gone from a small city and tripled in size to a major, highly developed, urbanized environment. Now, that's still continuing. And with it comes the disadvantage that we get a lot of air pollution. Now, air pollution has been a problem, so why is that going to drive copper now? Why would that now become the big driver? Well, I think the key thing that we're seeing is that there's an understanding that air pollution doesn't just make your eyes water and your throat a bit scratchy. Air pollution is a major, major health risk. And we're seeing more and more research that's pointing not just to respiratory problems, but also to problems with heart disease, problems with infant mortality. We're seeing problems related to dementia, to Alzheimer's. Right, very, very fine particles, particularly from combustion engines. So generators, cars, trucks, buses, airplanes, anything that's burning a fuel is producing a very fine particle, 2.5 micron particle, that's getting into our system, into our blood, and is moving into our brains. And it's not something that's coming and going, it's coming and staying. And that's the problem that we are starting to realize. And as soon as you can pinpoint a problem area, people are going to take action. Right? Lead, historically, was used in all sorts of things until people realized lead is a problem. Now there's no more lead in paint, there's no more lead in petrol, there's no more lead in pots or piping because it's a problem. So this is what we see as the big driver going forward. There's Shanghai in just 20 years. And the research that is being done is not people theorizing. This is a lot of very serious medical research that's going into this. The Lancet is a very, very highly regarded journal. They tracked millions of people over a long period of time, right, 2 decades, to see their response. And they found that people who live close to major roads are at a much higher risk of dementia. So if you live at a busy intersection, this is not something that's old age. This is not genetically inherited. This is being caused by air pollution. And you can pick your city, right? I chatted to a friend of mine who just came back from LA, and I said, "How was your trip?" And the first thing he says to me, "It was great. I had 3 days without any smog. We were very lucky." Right? That's the first thing he tells me about LA. Right? So this is a problem that is global. Any large city is suffering from this. So how do we overcome it? Well, you may have seen this image. It's quite instructive. This is 1900. Now, we might have the impression of New York in 1900, or any time, any part of the world in 1900. You write a letter, you have to post it. You want to see somebody, you have to make an arrangement ahead of time. There's no social media, there's no interconnectivity, things happen slowly. Well, 13 years later, spot the horse, right? This was a major disruption to industry in just 13 years at the beginning of the previous century. Now, Ford was making the vehicles and had to try and keep up with the demand. They became the leading miner of iron ore and the second leading producer of rubber, right, because they couldn't rely on the extractive industry to provide enough material. Right, does that ring any bells? Just a week and a half ago, we heard Tesla musing that maybe they need to get into mining. Right, do they trust us to produce enough metal for the coming age? We're not the only ones who think the combustion engine is on the way out. The Economist, it's had a good run, but its days are numbered. And it's not a case of, is the market going to grow large enough to justify a lot of usage in the EV market? I think the electric vehicles are going to be replacing combustion, to the point that talking about an electric vehicle will be like talking about a color television. You know, it's almost implied, and I think that's where we're going. Now, there's various metals in these different batteries, and they're distinguished by their specific metal, lithium or cobalt or vanadium. But we need to remember that that's not all that they're composed of. Right, we've been discussing that this week. There's a lot of graphite, there's a lot of nickel, and there's also a lot of copper. All right, there's a tremendous amount of copper that is going into not just the batteries, but all the electrics associated with these vehicles. How much? Well, a hybrid has got about double the copper of a normal combustion vehicle. A full electric vehicle, more than double that still. And we're starting to see Tesla have announced their first SUV, so we're seeing larger and larger electric vehicles, and they're going to be using more and more copper. So here is the demand for copper in addition to the current demand that we're seeing in the market. And something that I think perhaps as the Western world we're not quite as in touch with as we should be, but the inner workings of the Communist Party and President Xi Jinping. In China, when the president makes a decision, things happen, right? It's a command economy, and this is what is driving so much of the market. China can't catch up with Germany or can't catch up with Japan on the combustion engine, but it is determined to be the leader in battery technology and electric vehicles. Right? It has air, it has to clean up, and it has water, it is going to clean up. And this is a huge driver, and we can't underestimate a motivated workforce of 1 billion people. We see a lot of vehicles that have been coming out by these various makers. This is not just the one electric car that we offer. This is now becoming very commonplace. You might say, well, I don't think this is going to drive the copper price, given that we're talking Porsches and Jaguars. Yeah, well, these guys might. All right, these are the entry-level, mid-level cars that everybody is driving. Right, Ford is saying we're electrifying our iconic vehicles. So again, every vehicle is moving towards electrification. And not just vehicles. Tesla and others have announced trucks. The Paris Air Show has been happening, and they've been announcing electric or hybrid airplanes. Right? And you might think, well, that's just something to play with. There could be up to 200 different models of airplane that are relying on electrics by 2019. Right? Rolls-Royce says we're at the dawn of the third era of aviation. Right? This is across the entire economy. So you might feel bad driving your diesel, and you want your electric car that you can plug in. But of course, it doesn't help if it's coming from a really grubby coal-fired power station. So there's a big push for solar, there's a big push for wind. And therein lies another push in copper. Right? Solar installations, wind installations demand a lot of copper. The US has 18% of its energy coming from renewable sources. The UK, 24%. These are huge shares of the market, and they're the shares that are growing while the other shares are shrinking. Okay, so there's need for copper. Where is it coming from? Well, let's go to the normal culprits. We'll go down the west coast of South America, find the big porphyries. Right, these are big systems, well known, been mined for a long time, but the grades are dropping. You find good grade on the cap of these porphyries, and as you move deeper, the grades drop off dramatically. Escondida, the world's largest copper mine, has a reserve grade of 0.52% copper. Right, that requires either a lot of mining, or you're going to need to find some richer sources of copper. Here's something from S&P on the projected demand for copper continuing to grow, but mining supply dropping off. I think this has been recognized for a while, and the ability to replace copper with new mines there's not a lot on the horizon. There are not many greenfields discoveries. You can only try and work your existing mine for so long before geology or economics eventually put an end to it. So where does Ivanhoe fit into this? Well, Ivanhoe is a group of companies. Ivanhoe Mines covers copper, zinc, palladium, platinum, nickel. Clean Tech, nickel, cobalt, scandium, and VRB Energy is looking at vanadium. So across the spectrum of these new clean energies. How have Ivanhoe been doing? Well, in this year we've been doing very well. This was at 19th of June. We're up 61%. Today I think we're up about 70%. This is on the back of copper. It's also on the back of very peaceful transitions in government in the DRC through democratic elections and a democratic election in South Africa. So any concerns on these markets has been eased and is reflecting in our share price. We had a very significant year last year with a strategic investment by CITIC. The CITIC are a huge company in China. They're basically an investment arm of the Chinese government coming in and investing $550 million into Ivanhoe at the corporate level. This was followed up earlier this year with the announcement they're going to do a further investment of $450 million into Ivanhoe. So when this investment closes, we will have over $1 billion in the account. And that's more than enough to cover our funding requirements required for Kakula, our primary deposit. So we're in a very, very good place financially. And we have very strong partners that we can leverage off. So let's have a look at Kamoa-Kakula. This is a project I'm very excited about. I've worked on it for many, many years, watched it grow, and it's a story that I want to bring you along in. A lot of people have said today and yesterday and previously that they feel they've missed out on this. They really should have invested a few years ago, and they've missed their chance. And I'm here to say, well, no one in Ivanhoe is writing the conclusion. Right? We still believe we're very firmly in the process of this discovery and realizing the value from this discovery. So resources and reserves, you're going to need to recalibrate a little bit for Kamoa-Kakula. You'll see our scales are in kilometers. This is a massive deposit. When I talk 3%, I'm not mentioning our best discovery hole. I'm not even mentioning the grade we're going to be feeding to the mill. Now, 3% is our cutoff. So we're not planning to mine anything that is less than 3%. There's plenty of material lower than 3% that we'll get to. But in the first 20 years, we have so much high-grade material, we can focus on really high-grade cutoffs. Kamoa is a 50-50 joint venture partnership with Zijin and Ivanhoe Mines. That's 80% of the ownership, 20% is held passively by the DRC government. So we have a very established Chinese partner in this project. Adjacent to the mining license to the west, we have exploration licenses that are 100% owned. And I'm going to get to those because this is where the story is going. Right, resources and reserves, you'll see 1.4 billion tons. So we're getting into the realm of porphyry deposits, but we're running at grades of 2.6% copper on average. But what we're going to be mining is much higher than that. If you look at Kakula, the reserve is running at 5.48% copper. And that's not 6 months of really high grade or 1 year. That is over the 20-year mine life. So if we look at a 6 million ton per annum operation at Kakula, it has an NPV post-tax of $5.4 billion and an IRR of 47% over 25 years. And this is just the first phase. If I can now, just briefly, I'm a geologist, and the exploration story is very exciting here. This is DRC and Zambia. This is the copper belt, Central African copper belt. It's well known, it's been well studied, and it's been explored extensively. So why is Kamoa unique? Well, it's unique because everybody thought it was rubbish. People would walk over Kamoa, they'd look at the rocks, and they'd say, oh, we're in the wrong sequence. We need to be looking for the mines group, right, which by its name suggests, that's where you find the mines. But if the mines group's not developed, the fluid with the copper is still moving through the system. It just needs to find a new zone to mineralize. And so we came and picked up all the licenses around the edge of the copper belt and started exploring. And that is when we discovered a whole new style of deposit. We've opened up the whole western extent of this area and exposed its prospectivity. But we're the ones who are working there. We understand the controls. and no one else has got the land that we've got. So we're in a very, very unique, very enviable position, and I have many geologists who go a bit green when they look at these land holdings. So let's have a look at Kakula. This is where we're starting. What is so unique about Kakula? It's very high grade, it's very consistent. When we started drilling this deposit, we found these grades. If you'll see at the bottom of the hole, the grades are running consistently over 6% copper. We thought, oh, this must be a one-off. So we drilled the next hole. Same thing. We drilled the next hole. At times I was looking at a hole saying, are you sure this isn't a hole we looked at yesterday? Because they are so consistent across the zone. And the grades just continue. So you can see some of the intersections. 8.6 meters at 7.8% copper. You think, okay, well, you're just showing me your best one. Well, no, I could show you page after page after page of these. 14.8 meters at 7.7% copper. Now, this is the nature of Kakula, and it's thick, so we can mine a 6-meter mining cut and be inside that high grade the whole time. This is what it looks like. You'll see there's declines coming from the north and from the south. We've already got down to the ore body. We're in development. We're doing things like workshops and crusher stations underground. It's shallow, so it's starting at about 220 meters below surface and then dipping gently on either side away. And it's high grade. You'll see the dark reds and purples on the color scale are anything above 6% copper. So the mining is moving immediately into the highest grade part of the deposit, and we'll mine that for 5, 10, 15 years. Right? It's a scale thing. If you think that's about 4 kilometers of material above 6%. How does this compare? Well, Kamoa and Kakula has been moving very, very quickly up this chart. And we're now ranked as the 4th largest copper discovery in the world. So you'll see the peers are all our big porphyry copper deposits. So their grades are in the 0.5 to 1% range. We've got the tonnage of these kind of deposits, but we're running at grades of 2.6. Okay, so we're standing alone in terms of the grade. And in this kind of mining, grade wins. Here's the mine plan just on the first 5 years. You'll see the northern declines have come down. They have accessed the edge of the ore body. We're already starting to stockpile low-grade material. A southern decline has come in, and we're busy with that. And we're going to come with the first ore drive that's going to come right across the ore body. This is the moment I've sort of been waiting for. You know, I've been seeing Kakula through a small diameter drill hole, and now I'm going to be able to walk through it. Right, this is going to be quite a moment, and it's coming in the next few months. For the first 5 years, we're going to be mining a grade of 6.8% copper at a cash cost of 48 cents a pound. Right, that's the kind of margin you want when you're wanting to repay your capital. And if I can pause here, this is a picture of some of our geologists. These are geologists who have been trained in the DRC, and they're excellent. We have geologists who finished their master's degrees internationally, and they're some of the best geologists I've had the privilege to work with. We have an incredibly skilled workforce, process engineers, mining engineers. The DRC produces quality people. What about the metallurgy? Well, the metallurgy is pretty simple. It's a sulfide deposit. There's nothing fancy in the metallurgy. It produces a very high-grade concentrate, 57% copper, by nature of the fact that the copper mineral is chalcocite, which is the very high-grade copper mineral. And it also has almost no arsenic. So normally you measure arsenic in percent. We have to measure it in ppm because it's so low grade. So it's a very favorable concentrate to merge with some of the dirtier cons coming from the porphyries. Shipping and transport, we've got very good road networks that are used by all the major mining companies in the DRC. We also have a rail link that goes through the property that if the DRC government is going to fund the upgrade of that rail to the border, the Angolans have already upgraded the rail all the way to the port. So we have a very good prospect of being able to move to rail transport in the near future. Now, when you look at Kakula, you can't really think of it as a mine or Kamoa as a mine. It's a district of mines because it's such a large-scale deposit that you need to be able to tackle these different areas as separate operations. So we've looked at a larger case where we take 6 million ton operations from Kakula West, from an area called Konsoko, and see what is the value that's going to come out of those. And at that mining rate, 18 million tons a year, with a world-scale direct blister smelter, you get a NPV of $10 billion and an IRR of 41%. And Kamoa-Kakula becomes the second largest copper deposit in terms of production in the world. 700,000 tons of copper per year. We're going to become a major player. If you remember that little cartoon of plugging your car into the dirty power station, we can be very confident about our green credentials on the copper, but where are we getting our power from? Well, we've been doing a lot of work. I've been with the company over 6 years, and this has been ongoing from long before I joined, to regenerate power from the hydroelectric schemes. So we have sustainable, clean power powering our mine. And we've been actively working with the DRC government, and we've been putting power back onto the grid. So we've been adding additional power, and we're going to be sourcing that power as we ramp up production. What about the people where we are? Well, Kolwezi is a pretty big city nearby, but our project area is actually in a very sparsely populated area. But we've been building schools, we've been working with the locals to help them in their agriculture, in improving their lives, and we're going to be transforming their lives. This is something that's actively ongoing. And it's a project, the DRC government holds 20% of Kakula. So production from Kakula is going to have a wide impact on this country. Right? It's a project that the country itself is very excited about. So let's just step back to this image and just have a look. We've got these different areas. We've got Konsoko, which is sort of in the middle, that yellow star. That's where we started. And while we were mining at Konsoko, we moved down to Kakula and discovered Kakula, and then all the attention moved down to Kakula. But in the exploration, when we were drilling Kakula, we looked at our models, we looked at our data, and we said, we think there's something else to the west. So we went 3.5 kilometers, which as an exploration geologist is a pretty brave step. And on the second drill hole, we discovered Kakula West, which is the western extent of Kakula. This was the hole we got, 8.9 meters at 5.8%. That's pretty encouraging. It was a real validation of our exploration model. And then we said, okay, well, we're still looking at our data, and we think there's further potential. So if I go back to the west of Kakula, we own a lot of exploration ground. So let's move to the west to an area called Makoko. It's an absolutely gorgeous area. And we started drilling there. And on just the fourth drill hole, we discovered the high grade. And these are the kind of intersections we're getting. 3 meters at 6.5%, 7 meters at 7.8. This is what the rocks look like. These look very, very similar to Kamoa or Kakula. If I show any of the Kamoa geologists, where's this from? They'll say, this looks like it's from Kakula. Right? So in just the fourth hole, we've stepped 12 kilometers and been able to discover this new area. This is the challenge for us at Kamoa, is not finding resource. If you want more resource, I've got 1.3 billion tons, I can give you more. But you need to be able to find the high-grade resource. And we can't drill 800 holes to find it. You need to be able to pinpoint it quickly. This is a huge mining license and an even bigger exploration license. We can't spend time just drilling in the hope of finding something. And so we've been zooming in on these things really, really effectively. And then we went back to Kamoa and we said, with what we've seen in Kakula, we think there's an area of high potential. We've drilled it before on a wide grid. It didn't come back that spectacular, but we think it's really good. And we started drilling, and we hit this, 13.6 meters at 18.5%. So again, this is the Kakula story. The first hole in Kakula, you think, it's just a one-off. Right? This is what it looks like. This is the best hole we've ever drilled on the property. It's right up in the north. It's in an area that is now becoming very prospective for us. Just to give you a context, if you took the best hole at Kakula, you'd have to multiply it by 3 to get this hole. So there's Konsoko. This is where we were going to start mining. 6 meters at 6%. That's one of the best holes in Konsoko. Fantastic. I'm very, very pleased with a deposit like that. Kakula, right? It knocks our socks off. 8.8 meters at almost 10% copper, right? From hole to hole to hole. This is one of the best holes at Kakula. And that's Kamoa North. Right? We didn't think we could get better than Kakula. Everybody jokes with us as geologists, well, what are you going to find next? It has to be better. Right? Well, here we go. 22 meters at 13% at a 3% cutoff. And it's not on its own. Here are some other holes from that area. Right? 16, nearly 17 meters at 15.8. 5 meters at 10, 13 meters at 19%, 20 meters at 13.7. This is something that's just absolutely phenomenal. It's a perfect storm of everything coming together that you need geologically. There's so much copper in the system, you're actually starting to look like you're mining a massive sulfide deposit. Now, this is very unusual for a stratiform copper deposit, for a copper belt style deposit. So this is where I've brought you along on this story, and this is where I want to invite you to continue to join us in the story, because this is where we've been drilling at Kamoa North. Now, the trends that we can pick up from the data we have show us that this is on a system that has continuity. So we've only defined a small part of this. And over the next few months, we're going to be defining enough to look at a mining operation. But this thing continues, and it moves into our exploration ground to the west. And we're really, really excited as to the prospects of what this holds as we move west. So this is where Ivanhoe mines. Not only are we moving into production in Kakula on a phenomenally high-grade deposit, but the exploration potential is as good as it's ever been. I'm as excited about Kamoa-Kakula as I've ever been working on this deposit. So thank you very much.